Hello, and welcome to another Midweek Mochas at the Owlery.
Hi there, folks. So, I had this whole show scripted out, and it was going to be interesting, and then we looked at it and we realized that...
This is lame.
Yeah, I put in 2 hours of work and realized that the whole thing... But what we realized in reviewing why the show I had scripted was lame, we realized that it was because there was this fundamental element at the heart of it that we kept on, assuming people knew about, but realized that we probably need a whole show just on this topic to explain the concept that other things flow from. And then in the future episodes, I can put a little handy, hey, YouTube, go see this episode to learn more about.
Does anyone ever actually click on those?
Some people do.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't think I've ever clicked on one of those.
Anyways, our mystery topic, which I'm dancing around, is the idea of mastery learning. I'm sure we have, in previous episodes, talked about this before in passing, but we've never really dove into what is mastery learning.
And this may be the first episode anybody's watching because they're going to look at the ad copy for it and go, what the heck is mastery learning?
Very possibly. So... that is what we are talking about today, and what is, in a nutshell, what you would describe as the biggest difference between mastery learning and the way most people have probably approached traditional grading in their schools?
Well, first off, mastery learning, there are no grades. If you're required to give a grade, the grade is A, because you don't let the student move on until they've mastered the material at an appropriate level. And are prepared to move on. You tend to find this most typically in skill-based activities. If you're learning piano, you will work on a piece until you have competency in it before you start adding a new, more complicated piece. There are a lot of kind of modern advocates for mastery learning. Dr. Suzuki with the violin, which then got extended to a number of other instruments. I'm trying to remember who it was that created the, there's one of those math programs that is in fact built around mastery learning. I think it's Kumon. Kumon math, I think, is basically Dr. Suzuki's ideas about instrumentation transferred to how do you train mathematics and computational facility in a student.
And if you look at the way that Khan Academy is structured, Khan Academy, which is an online learning resource that started with maths, but it's covering a whole range of subjects now, it's functionally mastery learning as well.
Yes.
It's got a percentage, but the percentage isn't your performance on any test. You keep on going through the exercises until you have mastered 100% of a body of knowledge.
Right.
And you can always do refreshers.
Language apps will work this way.
Yeah.
I have some music, like voice and ear training apps that all the gamification works the same way. You're working towards mastery at a certain level before you're permitted to move on to the next level.
And the whole idea behind this is that fundamentally in any skill-based endeavor, it doesn't make sense to move on to higher levels of skill before you've mastered the lower ones. It would be like trying to build on an uncured foundation.
True, but it also applies to things more than just skill-based activities. Mm-hmm. We've certainly applied it and seen it applied in knowledge-based activities, and it's at the heart of how we approach homeschooling and how we recommend that you approach home education if you're going to join us on this adventure.
Okay, so if we're going to set out for people exactly what it means to do a mastery approach, let's take a subject area and describe how it would be done if you were approaching it from a grade base, mm-hmm. and how you would adjust to go into it from a mastery approach instead.
Okay. You have anything in mind?
Let me think. I was
going to say history.
History, that would be an excellent one, because that's not one where I've got a handy app that covers that.
Right. Okay. So in a standard school curriculum, a history subject will be chosen. It might be social studies in the grammar school. It might be, an actual history course in high school or even college. And normally what you'll have is a textbook. The textbook is divided into units. You're handed a syllabus. There will be workbook exercises, or there'll be exercises within the textbook. And then periodically your professor will give you quizzes and there will be tests and examinations in which you recall, and maybe there's some fill in the blank or some true false statements to evaluate. You have some sort of examination to determine whether or not you've read the material, you've absorbed the material, you've listened to the lectures, and that you can regurgitate the appropriate material. Those test results are then graded by the professor or the TA, and the result is the student is assigned a grade based on performance. There may be a class participation component, there may be a did you turn in your homework component, but principally it will be some way of evaluating how much of the material was communicated and then regurgitated by the student will be evaluated, and you will be graded A through D, A through F. Those grades have their origins in how the Prussian military in the 19th century decided to deal with illiterate conscripts who were intended to be cannon fodder, and to try and find the few good potential professional soldiers out of these masses of largely farm boys, and sometimes old men who were being forcibly dragged into the Prussian military machine.
So, that is a very useful way to rapidly find people who are already mostly skilled in some area. Mm-hmm. But the point of education, if you are doing this with your own children, shouldn't be filtering for the talented few. What you are trying to do is bring everyone to some particular destination.
Well, and that gets to the heart of the difference between schooling and education. Schooling is about instruction in a thing. Even to the point where schooling in the 19th century was a verb for the act of instructing the ignorant in facts and figures. Education comes from the Latin a, meaning out from, and ducare, ducere, is to lead. So education literally means leading someone out of the cave, as my t-shirt says, for example, which harkens back to Plato's allegory of the cave, written basically in the 5th century BC in his work, The Republic. So the project of education is essentially different from the goals of schooling. And that's one of the reasons I will frequently refer to it as home education rather than home schooling. Mm-hmm. Schooling to some degree is the problem. Education is in fact the solution.
And thinking through where that difference in, filtering for the talented few versus trying to lead any student to a particular destination. One of the first educators I would think of would be Maria Montessori, mm-hmm. because she had a very different approach to the material to be learned. She was actually handed not a sort of average classroom. She was asked to deal with what we would now call special needs children.
Yeah.
Severe learning disabilities, severe just general handicaps. These were considered uneducable children by the Italian state. And
so completely disposable and thus open to being used as guinea pigs in an experimental educational effort.
And the effort that Maria Montessori put forward was that rather than trying to sort and sift through to find the few people with a degree of talent or what people thought was the ability to learn, she started setting up a completely different approach that was not about filling a bucket with facts, so to speak, but about encouraging and facilitating discovery of principles.
And of the world around them through tactile objects and experiences.
And so you were still going to teach to write, but you started by learning what A-ness and B-ness and C-ness were with letters made out of sandpaper, where you could have a small child feel the difference in them, not just see the difference.
And associate that felt difference with the sound, because language is an oral phenomenon. It involves the mouth and the ears.
And a Montessori classroom properly set up has all of these different stations with very carefully designed activities focusing around very specific small ideas that are going to build on each other. And through that discovery process, the student is eventually going to be led towards an understanding of the material to their degree of capacity. What was interesting, though, was that this very different approach, an approach that wasn't about testing to see how much people could remember at a particular age, but rather about trying to lead them to a destination, had them, in fact, performing higher than the normal students.
Yes, very, very rapidly.
Very rapidly. And so that's one of the reasons why mastery approach can initially be kind of scary, because you don't have the particular mechanisms that you're used to seeing for what you think of as progress.
It doesn't look like schooling, and it shouldn't look like schooling.
Because the question is your goal to get a classroom with a bell curve of grades, with a normal distribution, with a few A's and a few fails, and somewhere in the middle most people hover around to C?
Or force that, because there are definitely schoolrooms and businesses that force a bell curve.
Or is your goal to have everyone master the material? There was a movie from my youth about a calculus summer class, and the teacher of this class eventually got accused of cheating in some way, because he managed to take a bunch of kids who everyone else had given up on,
Right.
and not only get them to pass this calculus, but all of them with flying colors.
Do you remember the movie?
Stand and Deliver.
Was that Stand and Deliver?
Lou Diamond Phillips was the big name at the time, and he was like one of the main kids in the classroom.
Okay.
But the focus of it was that you had a teacher who was focused on material mastery, not on seeing who was going to catch up and who was going to fall behind. And I think at the heart of it, of the approach, is that if you're trying to lead any student towards mastery, your focus is on that individual student and on helping them understand the material and not giving up on them, even if it doesn't take the amount of time you think it should take to get them to the destination.
Right.
And that's different from an approach that's trying to find the few who can get there quickly. And I
Yes.
think that sometimes the reason we'll decide to fall back on that grading approach is because we think that it teaches things like you should get your work done on time, or you should only do the things that you're talented at, and the grades show you what you're talented and what you're not.
Which is bullshit.
It isn't. It isn't true. It's just a habit of thought that we've achieved. So when we advocate doing mastery approach, it's going to be a little scary at first, because it's not going to give you the feedback you expect. You're expecting feedback like, my kid is good in math and my kid is average as a writer.
When
Well,
in fact your kid could be good at both, given the right amount of...
time and tools.
Yes.
It may take them longer to be a good writer than to do what they naturally do well.
And it may not be something they ever enjoy doing and elect to do voluntarily, but it is entirely possible to produce people who are competent arithmeticians, competent writers, competent speakers, who have a facility for apt quotation and a widely stocked inventory of things in their mind and life experience they've encountered before they're 16 or 17 years old.
And to go back to our history, a mastery approach is going to say, we're not going to let you get by with remembering only about half of American history. If it's a pursuit if it's a subject worth pursuing, it is worth pursuing to mastery.
Well, and that's a whole separate discussion, is what subjects are worth pursuing.
And
And I certainly have some particular ideas.
You
around
have
that.
opinions on that.
Yes, I do. Very firm ones.
But everyone, I think, is going to have a different opinion, and that is to some degree why the point is the approach. Figure out what are the things that have to be mastered.
Right.
And then don't give up on your child until you get them to where they are performing at an A level. Now, you can have them recognize if it takes them a lot longer than you would expect to master an area, well, that's probably not one that they want to focus on as their life's work.
Or perhaps they discover they really do love it because of that effort. Think of the exchange you had with, I believe, one of your math teachers in high school, who commented that the better, at least I think it was one of your math teachers, there was someone you had encountered in your high school years who observed that the students who were naturally good at a subject made the worst teachers of that subject.
Oh, I observed that in myself, because everyone always said, Laura, you're such a good writer. Can you help tutor your other classmates? Well,
No, you couldn't.
no, I can't.
Because you don't know what you're doing. You just kind of do it.
Well, certainly not as a sixth grader.
Well, true.
At this point, I've taken teacher training courses in writing, but the fact is I couldn't have come up with those on my own. I
Right.
had to find someone who had worked and experimented with turning students into good writers and using those techniques. I can't rely on my own good instincts.
Right.
And while my instincts might be able to suggest to my child, this might be a way of phrasing that's a little more elegant.
Mm-hmm.
That's just instinct.
Right.
And
you can't teach that, really.
Whereas I can take a book of rhetoric and I can say, here's a technique that is going to be more rhetorically powerful.
This is polysyndeton, this is assonance, this is zeugma.
Yeah.
You can use these structures in this way in order to accomplish your objective.
Alliteration is powerful. Groups of threes are powerful. Those sorts of tips and tricks that you might have internalized in a properly designed course, you can teach outright.
Explicitly.
And just because a student doesn't have a natural facility for writing doesn't mean they won't eventually become a good writer or even become a writing teacher. In fact, one of our writing programs that we've used for years is from Institute for Excellence in Writing. Yeah. And Andrew Pudawa, who is one of the spokesmen for the company, points out that the two things he hated as a child were writing and violin. And his first two jobs out of school were violin teacher and writing teacher. So you can't assume because it's not your favorite subject or because it takes you a long time for mastery that it's not an area that you shouldn't pursue.
Right.
And so we get the wrong messages from grades. And so a mastery pursuit gives you the time to actually take on all of the material, to not start trig until you've gotten geometry under your belt, for example.
And to discover where do those natural talents and inclinations lie and where do they not. As a parent, you're going to be faced with the challenge. My child does not enjoy this. I'm not sure I really enjoy trying to teach this. But it's a subject that I think is important. And so you find a way to make it work, whether it's through a tutor or through a particular program, or you experiment. And in that experimentation, maybe the child discovers they actually do enjoy this, or they discover they really don't, and they know that, any career trajectory that's going to involve advanced study of a given subject, they should probably not bother with.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that process of discovery becomes part and parcel of the day-to-day existence when you're doing home education.
And it helps you filter out what is the reason we're studying these.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a child who's saying, I want to become a veterinarian, well, you can start and look at their subject areas and say, okay, if you want to become a vet, there's a path through college you're going to have to go to get to vet school. So here are the things that you have to study and master for the sake of getting to your end goal. And then within that wider realm of you need to be good in these areas simply to get into the school, you can say, and if you want to be a veterinarian, you need to make sure you've truly mastered biology and to a deeper degree than the average high school student, because that's an area that you care about. But if they really want to be a vet, there may be that drive to study deeper and get to mastery faster anyway.
And also to look into experiences. Can you volunteer at a zoo? Can you volunteer or work part-time at a local veterinarian clinic? Do you have friends who have animals and they need to care for those animals? We happen to live in an area where there are a lot of people who keep horses, and quite a few people still keep head of cattle for commercial ranching. We go out to a dairy farm every couple of weeks to buy stuff directly from the farm. And so that's part of the world our kids are growing up in, and it's very natural if one of them, for example, wants to become a veterinarian. Oh, okay, well, we can talk to Dr. So-and-so, or we can talk to the such and suches and whatnot. And how would you recommend we get started and look into pursuing this?
Yes, and for the purpose of saying, well, why am I studying these classes? You can say, well, if you want to be a veterinarian, you have to have very good grades in these areas to qualify for one of the schools. You also want to have experience working with animals and know that you can work with them. And it's the combination of those two, mastering the material necessary for your end goal, combined with testing the vocation to make sure that it's an appropriate one that helps you balance that, and to understand why it matters that you cover biology.
Right.
Whereas if you have a student who already knows at 15 he wants to be an electrician, well, you find out from that trade school what are the materials they need to have mastered to get into getting an apprenticeship.
And you talk to local electricians.
And if you discover, because they're already certain that their path is they want to be a tradesman, they need to go to get this apprenticeship, they might have to do a junior college course, whatever their path is, you may discover there's typical college prep track classes that aren't actually necessary
Correct.
for that track. And so the necessity of learning to mastery everything isn't actually there. You have to master what is necessary for the path you're taking in life.
Right. And so mastery approach to education becomes an aspect of how you help your child discern what is their vocation and what trajectory do they want to go on. So I hope that's been helpful. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out. Contact is in the show notes below this episode. And if there's anything we can do, we're happy to help.
Alrighty. Thank you so much. Bye.
Shadow over there where it curves in.
Yeah, nothing can be done about that.
Okay.
We've got audio. It looks good. It sounds good.
There we go. That works.
There! Look at that! Dynamic angles.
Have a sip of coffee and then I will do the intro.
Alrighty.
Do you have some sort of a scripted outro so you can hit all the social media?
I'm just gonna. I'll just do the. I'll handle the outro and point people to the show notes.